Hi there! Last weekend I played an on-the-board rapid tournament in Munich, and I want to show my games in a series of videos with you. I start now with showing my game from round number 1, where I played against a guy with a rating of around 1800 and I had the black pieces. The game started off with d4, knight f6, knight f3, and now I chose to play d5. He played g3 and I settled for a setup with bishop to f5, bishop g2, e6, castle, c6, and c3. This move already surprised me a bit because I thought this is not so ambitious. Starting with c3 here, I have no issues. I can even take some more time to really keep this bishop, never allowing this knight on f3 trade for my bishop, which sometimes would be a threat. Later, if he wants to go for it immediately, it's not so easy because I can provoke some weaknesses. Also, I can maybe hop here. I can hop here, provoke some pawn moves, and only then give my bishop. So at this early stage, it's not possible, but I think there are more ambitious setups for white than putting a pawn to c3. However, the game continued here. Knight to d2, knight d7, rook e1. And this is already a moment where you should pay some attention. And my question is, should you develop the bishop to e7 or to d6? If you want to challenge yourself, pause the video here, make your decision, and I will just go ahead now and show what happened in the game and why you should not place the bishop on d6. If the bishop is on d6, white can execute his idea. And his idea is basically to break through with pawn to e4, free his pieces and free this bishop as well. And he will do this by playing knight h4 first, hitting my bishop, need to retreat, and then e4. And there are two problems now. The first problem is with the bishop on d6 and knight on f6, you're more or less forced to capture on e4, which opens all the white pieces. And even though white might not be better, black is not better either. So some situation like this, white will later return with the knight to f3, and his bishop also has some scope. White has a little more space and has no issues. Okay, black doesn't have issues either, but also black cannot really count on any advantage here. So what's actually the difference if we put the bishop to e7? If we put the bishop on e7, which I did in the game, this whole line doesn't work. Not only does e4 not threaten a fork, but also this knight is kind of attacked by the bishop, and so white will ruin his own structure here after takes, takes, takes. I can take on h4, and white's pawns will be spoiled, and he will even lose a pawn on h4. So that's quite a difference. And without this e4 break working, white really struggles to find a plan. He has placed his pieces like this really to execute e4, but it's so hard to make it work. And without the rook on e8, on e1, sorry, does not make any sense. So white in the game decided to bring his bishop out to the other side, but I was already quite happy with black, as the bishop on b2 with pawns on c3 and d4 is not intimidating at all. And I gained some space. He didn't let me go further, and after castle bishop b2, we reach another interesting position. If you want to challenge yourself again, you can try to figure out what you would do here. There are several good moves, I guess, but I think it's also a lot about understanding what are the plans, what you should do, what you should be waiting for, and so on. So in the game I played the very calm move, bishop to h7 back, and I think this is quite a useful move. First, you always step out of this knight h4, which sometimes is an idea. Also, this bishop is not hit by e4, so even though it's not possible yet, sometimes e4 will hit the bishop on f5 with a gain of time, whereas now the bishop is already like removed, and after e4 you can take, but you don't have to because there is no attack against the bishop. Furthermore, I think in this position it's not so easy to find an active plan for black, but it's even harder for white to find any active plan, and I basically gave him the chance to go wrong at this point because the only active thing he can do is like jump to e5, which he did, and which I consider to be probably a poor choice, which was the right evaluation. Meanwhile, if he was just waiting around, I need to find a plan as well. Maybe I go rook c8, improve my queen, and finally push something like c5. But yeah, that's not so easy. So maybe the best strategy for him would be just to sit and wait, maybe improve this bishop on b2, but it's not easy. Black is comfortable, but it's not so easy to find a plan. But this knight e5 was wrong, and now I already was thinking I might get a huge advantage here. One rule which I tell my students a lot about knights jumping to e5 is either tolerate them or take them immediately, because usually when you take later, white is better prepared. For example, if white strengthens the knight with a knight and you take, then he will jump with another knight. Also, in some instances, probably not here, white can strengthen the knight with the f-pawn, and then if you take later, he will recapture with the f-pawn, opening the f-file. Of course, this is more likely to happen if the rook is still on f1, but in general, my rule is like, if you take immediately, he needs to take with the d-pawn, which is in general, yeah, the better version for black, because no f-file is opened. And since I didn't see any point in tolerating the knight, and I saw this e5 pawn even as a weakness, I took this knight immediately, which was a good choice. And here I spent quite some time because I thought I might win the game immediately. So why is that? And what did I spend the time on? So there are two moves. Basically, you want to win this pawn. And out of those two moves, knight g4 is the more aggressive move, because it not only hits the e5, but it also hits the f2 and the e3. Okay, e3 is just a square, but for example, after knight g4, if he were to support his pawn with f4, first of all, the knight could jump to e3 immediately, gaining the pair of bishops. But also, of course, there is queen b6, which is probably winning on the spot. So this is better in the knight g4 version. Also, if he was just defending this pawn with some random move, it might be possible to attack on f2 as well, and things might get very, very complicated very, very quickly for white. However, knight g4 also has a downside, and that's why I finally decided not to go for it. It's more aggressive, but it's also way more risky, because the knight itself is not having that many squares. And I saw lines like, for example, queen to c7 or also bishop to c5, but there is e3 and the knight is even getting into trouble as it's not ready to capture on e5. There is some solution like pawn to f6, it's a good move, but yeah, I didn't consider this too much because I wanted to win the pawn and not to trade it. Of course, black is better here because black is having all the activity against f2 and so on, but this was not so easy, and so I decided to go with the safer option, and I was evaluating this as this is also quite promising as I attack the weakness. Basically, I think my pieces are good. So, for example, this bishop is better than his bishop here because it's looking far into his camp, no queen c2 possible, while his bishop is just hitting my pawns. Also, if we compare the other bishops, I think I have the superior one, and also e5 is quite weak. So he continued f4, probably, yeah, already he's in a tough situation here. And after f4, the best I could have done was something like queen b6 check, and then just go king h1 and rook 8 to d8 and later play f6. Basically, I did not realize how good my position in this case was, because I thought, okay, what am I doing? I did not really consider f6, and I also thought he might get some counterplay with some e4 or something, but it doesn't really work out well for him. If he goes something like e4, I get a lot of activity. There are so many squares. This d3 is weak. b3 pawn is also weak. So he really needs to take a lot of care. And yeah, if he would take on d5, I might even jump to d3 and it's already winning, hitting the f2 square with a fork, hitting this bishop, and yeah, white is already busted. So this would have been even stronger. I instead played f6, trying to open the position because I felt I have the more activity and I also might get some chances against his king. He needs to take, I took with the knight, and he played e4, after which I really wanted to attack this king. And I did not play the strongest move. The strongest would have been to open the center, because I'm also stronger in the center as this bishop is not joining. And I have, I would say, more pawns in the center, as I do have like those 3 pawns versus those 2. So when I try to rip it open, I think I have more strength there. So that would have been the best, but I instead decided to go for another interesting line, which is h5. So what's the point of h5? Basically, my idea is pretty simple. I want to be able to jump with this knight to g4 in some instances. And if he prevents this with h3, I thought he might weaken his pawns, and at some point I might even throw h4 ripping his king open on the dark squares. So still, I think h3 was a decent try, or yeah, anything like queen e2, but still I thought my knight on g4 might be a very good piece. And yeah, he made a big blunder here. He played e5, which is, yeah, not great, because now I can get the mating attack going with queen b6 and knight g4, threatening this typical checkmate. For example, if he would just remove the queen, I would checkmate him in 4 moves. Check, double check, king goes into the corner, queen sacrifice, and after rook takes, there is knight f2 mate. He of course saw this, and he played this emergency rook e2, where he's ready to sacrifice the exchange so that he won't get mated. And I calculated for a while, if I have something better than to grab the exchange, maybe grab the exchange another way and then still jump with the knight. But I didn't see that much points in that. And also I cannot really wait with any other move, because he might just cover the square and then I'm not winning an exchange. So I went and converted the positional advantage to some material advantage. Now I'm an exchange up. He cannot even take this pawn, as his knight on d2 would drop. And black is winning here. After bishop a3, I just traded, opened the position further, traded on g3, opened the position further. He basically has to take, and after that, I opened the d file and he resigned, because there is basically nothing he can do against some plans of rook coming in, rook or pawn going forward, and his material down, and his pieces are really placed in a bad manner. So that was it. It was a smooth start. Of course, after h5, e5 helped me a lot, but anyway, black was already pushing. So that's it for the first round. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and I will continue with round 2 in the next video. See you. Goodbye.